alabaster flask of pure nard, very costly, broke it on him so it could not be reused. And of course the aroma filled the room. And Judas objected. This could have been sold, given to the poor. And Jesus' response was, "Let her alone. She hath done what she could. She hath prepared my body aforetime for burying." And I told James that, when I think back about people I've had a lot of respect for, men who have done a tremendous amount, and I think, man, I've just not come, I don't even hold a candle to so many fellows I've had a lot of respect for. And I think, well, maybe my abilities are not what theirs would be. Maybe the opportunities have not been what some have had. Maybe the circumstances have not been the same. Anyway, I told him, I said, I think the same with you. Everybody has advantages and disadvantages growing up. And we can make mistakes and we come back. But it looks like to me, from what you've done since you've been there, you've done, like Mary, what you could. And one thing we can be thankful for is the Lord does not compare us to others. He judges us fairly, mercifully, based on some absolutes that he mentions, but also given what our desires have been, what we've tried to do with the abilities that we've had. And I've mentioned to him the parable of the talents, the 5, 2, and 1 talent, each according to his individual ability. So the Lord judges us on those kinds of things as well. What we have opportunity to do, what we do with the opportunities we have, how we respond. And I told him, I said, that gives me confidence in the Lord and confidence for you. And we kind of left on those notes. I told him, hope to see you later. And that's about all we could do. His execution, I believe, is going to be Thursday. So I wanted to share something else with you. It was James, not Ben Brownfield. I was talking with him about that yesterday. Our readings are in Proverbs. And it was James who said, when he started reading the Bible, when he was still in Donaldson, that if he had just read the book of Proverbs, he's made it a practice to read a chapter a day. Since the 31 chapters, you can read it through in a month. And he said, if I had just read the book of Proverbs, nothing else, he said, I wouldn't be here where I was. And so it reminds me of Psalm 119, thy word have I laid up in my heart that I might not sin against thee. That there is power in the word to remind us of what circumstances we need to avoid, what we need to flee. And when we do, then that can help us. All of us have sinned, but there are some things that we can do that can be avoided. And the more sin we engage in, the worse our consequences are going to be, even on earth. And of course, we talked some about that, the difference between the guilt of sin and the consequences of sin. And so, anyway, I thought it went about as well as it could. We are in Proverbs in our reading. Hope you had a good week so far. A good last week, and we're in the first part of this week, aren't we? In Proverbs, numbers 194, 95, and 96 take us through the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, which really is the first section of Proverbs. The word proverb means an absolute truth without variation, true or false. That's false. A proverb is what we might call a general truth. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Is that always true? Not absolutely true all the time, without exception. But these are statements that are extremely helpful. And the first 9 chapters, there's not a whole lot of outlining that you can do. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge in chapter 1, verse 7. And then in verse 8 through about 19, he talks about the fact that he needs to hear his parents. My son, hear the instruction of your father and forsake not the law of your mother. And he talks about things that can happen when that does not occur. Wisdom is personified. Look at verse 20. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. She utters her voice in the broad. She cries in the chief places at the entrance of gates. How long, ye simple ones, will you love simplicity, and scoffers delight them in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? And so here, wisdom is like a person who's teaching these things. All right, in chapter 2, there's a second appeal that's made for the son. By the way, Solomon, the writer, is writing to whom? To his son. Yes, to his son. And so words of the wise father to the son. My son. Notice chapter 3, verse 1. My son, forget not my law. 5 and 6 is quoted by a lot of people, and rightly so. There are two good proverbs. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not upon your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Acknowledge the Lord, and of course to do that is to consult his word, consult his will. Verse 11, my son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as father the son in whom he delights. Is that quoted anywhere in the New Testament? Yes or no? Yes, yes. Hebrews, the 12th chapter, okay? 4th chapter, again, a fourth appeal, the 5th appeal in chapter 5. Verse 23 is commonly quoted. And keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the, what does your translation say? Issues. Any other translation? Anybody? Do you have the well springs of life? Out of it are the well springs. Your heart, Jesus talked about that in Mark 7, Matthew 15. From out of the heart, evil words proceed. And evil thoughts proceed, adulteries, fornications, evil speakings. So from the heart of man, the thinking, the will, all of that. So we need to keep our heart diligently. 5 has some moral precepts in it. 15 and following basically stay put with your own wife. Don't look outside that relationship. 6 has a number of warnings against being idle. Look at verse 6 through 11. Warning against sloth. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. And the busyness industry of ants. Let's see. 16, 17. 18, 19, remember those. Those are good to highlight. 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination to him. And a couple of times it's mentioned one idea there. The fact of haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart devises wicked, feet that swift in running, false witness, he that sows discord among brethren. Haughty eyes. What are haughty eyes? It's another term for that. Arrogance, yeah, just kind of that condescending. It might not necessarily be a haughty eyes, look down. Oftentimes it is, so he kind of look down at you. All right. And then 7, I remember hearing some preaching on this way back. 7 pictures somebody doing what? A woman doing what? Seducing a young man. I remember, I think I've made this point before, but where verse 7, I beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding. He might have had a PhD, but he was simple. And he's simple to the things of moral problems. And so the picture is painted of basically a harlot and how she can seduce a man, and the ends of it are death. And it's a tremendous passage that young people, old people for that matter, but people need to be taught that tremendously. that and it's in very picturesque language, and the description is, everything is just right in them. In chapter 8, wisdom's self-commendation, the American Standard has, and then in 9, wisdom's feast and invitation. Again, wisdom is personified in these passages, and people are wise or foolish depending on their response to it. Look at verse 7 of chapter 9. He that corrects a scoffer gets to himself reviling, and he that reproves a wicked man gets himself a blot. Reprove not a scoffer lest he hate thee, but reprove a wise man, and he will love thee. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a righteous man, yet he will increase in learning. If we are mistaken about something, a correction should not be hated. It ought to be what? Welcomed, appreciated. I want to be right. I want to be right on everything. And if I'm not, then help me out that I might be right on those things. Chapter 10 we'll cover that Wednesday night, Lord willing. But chapter 10 deals with a type more of some proverbs that fit into a particular kind of analysis here. We won't take time because the time is rapidly going this morning. All right, back on the life of Jesus, and just love to study it.
Philip,
Yes, sir.
your slides are not in the proper order now.
Uh-oh, and who did that?
The button is right here on the.
Okay, that's all right. I'll get it. All right, let's just orally go through real briefly here. We're still at 48 there, Jonathan. Okay, so as we're going through the life of Jesus, we want to remember it just starts in Luke 1, chronologically. It starts where he ended up. It's almost like God says, no, as I was saying a few hundred years ago, the time will come when I will send Elijah the prophet. And so we have the years of preparation with the birth of John, the birth of Jesus, and the early work of John. And then after that, we've got did I say beginning ministry or years of preparation? I meant to say years of preparation. Did I?
I think that's what you said.
Okay, so I said it right. Then the beginning ministry begins with what event?
It's baptism.
His baptism. And this is all not even on the chart here, but it's down below in the region of Judea. And then the beginning ministry after his temptation, he goes, people around here in Judea began to follow him, and then he goes up with the great Galilean ministry, makes Capernaum his home, a number of miracles on the Sabbath day, a number of healings on the Sabbath day, the Sermon on the Mount, the calling of the 12, the giving of them special powers, Matthew 10, limited commission, and then and then when he begins to talk about the fact that I'm the bread that came down out of heaven, and except you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. Then what happened to his popularity? It began to crumble, and so around that time we start goes over to Bethsaida, and don't let this confuse you. This is actually my chart on the fourth retirement, but the first one, he goes over to Bethsaida, feeds the 5,000. And sends the multitudes away, and then he comes back across the sea, walking on the water, and then who wants to come to him? Peter. And he's successful for a while. They ended up at Gennesaret, then goes to Capernaum, where he does have the I am the bread of life speech, and more work around Capernaum. And then we have he goes to Tyre, where he heals the Syrophoenician's daughter, to Sidon, back over here to Decapolis, somewhere in here, and feeds the how many thousand? 4,000. Goes to Dalmanutha, has an argument with the Pharisees over, they say, you just show us a sign from heaven, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. And then as he leaves this area and goes back up to Bethsaida, where he heals the blind man, there he says, you need to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And then we forgot to bring bread. And so he corrects that. And then they come to Bethsaida and heals the blind man, as we've mentioned here. And then we traveled to Caesarea Philippi, where we've already discussed the announcement of the establishment of the church, and then the prediction of his death right after that. He says, I've got to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things of the scribes and the chief priests, be put to death and be raised the third day. And who says, oh no? Peter. And Jesus rebukes Peter about that, and then expands the whole idea of discipleship, that if any man would come after me, let him do what three things? Good. Very good. And then he says, he said, but the truth of the matter is, the Son of Man is going to come in what two positions there, and will overcome these people who are persecuting them and him? Judgment and king. And then he travels northward, best we can tell, to Mount Hermon, where he's transfigured before, what three apostles are taken up into the mount apart from the others? Peter, James, and John. He's transfigured before them. His face shone as the sun. His garments became white as the light. And then there appeared with him, what two Old Testament characters? Moses and Elijah. What were they talking about? His decease that was about to be accomplished in Jerusalem. And so Peter said, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you will, let's do what? Make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And then while you yet said these things, behold, a voice came from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him. Ye, all of you, listen to him. And then Moses and Elijah departed, and there they were in the mount. So that's where we've gone in our study so far. And again, here's a picture of Mount Hermon that we took from right outside Caesarea Philippi. And then looking, Jesus will be transfigured. We've already talked about that. Now, I want to move on. Looking back north at Mount Hermon, we start to go a little south. And it's evidently around this time, as they come down the mountain, that they're going to have a discussion with the apostles. They start thinking, Moses and Elijah have just appeared. And the question involves whom? What Old Testament prophet? Elijah. And so let's see here if we can't come on here. Here we go. Right here. Let me back up. He travels to Mount Hermon, Transfiguration. Then who's coming down is about Elijah and when he's descending the mountain. Let's pick up in our study there, guys. And we're on page 96. 95. We're on page 95. And let's do this. Let's turn to Matthew's account, Matthew 17, and just reread this latter part. I've got in the notes, and most do, that continues on the transfiguration scene that is really in 1 through 8, and then in 9 through 13, this where the apostles ask about Elijah. Some include that, and as I did in the whole thing, because it's kind of in the same place, in the same conversation. Let's read that, 9 through 13 of Matthew 17. Richard, you have it?
And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, why then say the scribes that Elias must come first? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall come first and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist.
All right, there have been a number of instances that we've already studied that indicates there was confusion as to who this Elijah was. Let's go back real briefly. Keep your finger there to the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi 4. Malachi 4. The last 3 verses. He calls attention to the fact they should look backward and remembering the law of Moses. And then he tells them to look forward in verses 5 and 6. Behold, I will send you who? Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite thee with a curse. Now, when we come to just turn a page or two and we come to the New Testament, there have been difficulties with some of the apostles understanding that. In Luke 1, when the angel Gabriel appeared to Zacharias, you remember he told him that your prayer, verse 13, your supplication is heard, and your wife Elizabeth shall bear a son. And his name will be called John, and you'll have joy and gladness. Many shall rejoice at his birth. If you pick up the reading in 16 and 17, Lee, if you would look at that, read it for us. Luke 1, 16 and 17.
And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. He will also go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord.
All right, so the identification by Gabriel of who this Elijah of whom Malachi spoke is who? John the Baptist. He said, this is going to be John. And so evidently while there was a miracle that certainly surrounded the birth of John, they were barren, older in years, and John is the object of prophecy, the subject. He came in the spirit and power of Elijah, dressed kind of like Elijah, which was a leather girdle. What was his food? Locusts, wild honey. He ate off the land. And basically his teaching was the same as Elijah. Elijah came onto the scene during the days of Ahab and his good wife, Jezebel. You know, I'm just jesting with that. And his point was to turn, did I say something wrong? Turn the hearts of the people and the national leaders around, and because of their, the national established religion was just terrible at that time. Well, so it was with John. And so his primary message was turn or burn, repent or perish. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So there were a number of similarities in John and Elijah. But a lot of people didn't believe that. They thought even when Jesus was on the cross, you remember when he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? Some said he calls for Elijah. Well, no, maybe a misunderstanding of his pronunciation, but they were still having Elijah on the brain, so to speak, and could not get it fixed in their mind that John really was the fulfillment of that passage back in Malachi 4. So in really Matthew 17 is the real answer. Let's turn over real briefly to Matthew 11. Matthew 11, there's another occasion here where when John hears of the imprisoned, what Jesus is doing, he sends the disciples to ask, are you the one, or look we for another? And Jesus has several answers to that. What did you go out to see? You think you went out to see a man in soft clothing and they could just be swayed by the wind of men? That's verse 7 and 8. I tell you, you saw more than a prophet. Verse 10, this is he of whom it is written, I send my messenger before your face. And of those who are born of women, there's not arisen a greater than John, but he that is little in the kingdom is greater than he. And he goes on to say, look down in verse 13, for all the prophets in the law prophesied till John, and if you're willing to receive it, this is Elijah that is to come. Now the grammar on that sounds almost confusing to some. That is Elijah, that John is Elijah that is to come. That is spoken of as if you were where? Back in the days of Malachi. So he says, this John, or that John that you've been talking about, is the same one who is to come, that is who is to come, spoken from Malachi's perspective. And so he answers it there. But 17th chapter of Matthew really deals again with the explanation. All right, let's answer our questions on this here, guys. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this. Where was I? On page 95, I had mentioned we answered all the way down to what, guys? Elman? What's that, Patty?
I circled start with J.
J? Okay. Well, maybe that's why I was confused. What was the significant error of Peter's suggestion when considering God's response? That is, that we make 3 tabernacles. What did it do? But his suggestion, let's make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. That puts Jesus on the same par with Moses and Elijah. Either it de-escalates or devalues Jesus on a par with these prophets, or it elevates the prophets up to a deity with Jesus. And so Moses and Elijah had their place, but now here Jesus, he takes preeminence over all who are before him and any who would go after him. All right, K. God responded by saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." What? Hear him. Yes. When considering the presence of Moses and Elijah, God's response indicates what about Christ relative to them. And Hebrews 1 really gives you the answer. That God spoke in different ways in olden times, but now what, Janet? He's superior. That's right. In these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. And I quoted McGarvey there that this command contains the chief significance of the entire scene. Spoken in the presence of Moses and Elijah, it gave Jesus that preeminence which his Son has over servants. He is to be heard. His words have preeminence over those of the lawgiver and prophet. I was thinking about this, and I didn't mention it Wednesday night. Even Moses wrote in Deuteronomy 18:15, all of you can quote that, "A prophet like unto me shall the Lord your God raise up from among your brethren, and to him shall you hearken." Of whom did he speak? Jesus. Even Moses wrote that there's going to be someone else coming who in a way is like me, but you need to listen to him. And it looks like that's the main point that is in this scene of the Transfiguration. All right, when the disciples heard this, and you can appreciate if we'd been there, we would have probably been the same way. They were very what? They were afraid. And what did Jesus do? He touched them, and that's how we ended class Wednesday. He touched them and arise and don't be afraid. Jesus did in a physical way to them what his death would allow him to become for all, and that's a mediator. Here there's fearfulness from the voice coming from heaven, and here it's okay. It's all right. We've got access to the Father. Hebrews 4:14 through 16. If you don't have it memorized already, it'd be worthy of your memorization. It speaks of Jesus was tempted in all points like, having therefore a high priest who hath passed through the heavens. He came from heaven, he came to earth, he passed back to heaven. Let us hold fast our confession. For we have not a high priest that cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but one that hath been in what? All points tempted like as we, yet without sin. Based on that, let us therefore draw near with boldness to the throne of grace. It's a throne, it's kingly, but there's grace, there's mercy. His kingly priesthood. He has all authority, but when we make a mistake, he still wants us saved. And here's his grace as our high priest. So all of that is so meaningful in those 2 or 3 passages. What did Jesus charge them not to do? Tell the what? Tell the vision to no man till what time? The Son of Man had been risen from the dead. The time was not right to publicize this for at least 2 reasons. One is they still didn't understand the significance of many things Jesus said and did, and should not publicize them. And second, the Transfiguration anticipated his resurrection. exaltation, his glorified position. And since that had not yet occurred, many would likely doubt Peter, James, and John's veracity. All right, many years later, this is what I couldn't think of a while ago. Many years later, Peter wrote 2 Peter 1, 16 through 18. And really, in that passage, he's commenting on this event, the Transfiguration. Did it make much of an impression on him? And if so, how? Brother Gene?
He said, we were there on that scene,
Yeah,
and eyewitnesses,
right.
His Majesty.
Yes, he mentions his majesty, his glory. And he said, we didn't follow cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and presence of the Lord, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. And then he talked about having seen them. And then he followed that with saying, but we have the word of prophecy made more sure. And I don't believe Peter says that this was more important than the word of prophecy. But the word of prophecy is even more sure than what we witnessed. And in addition to what we witnessed on the Holy Mount, which showed Jesus of Nazareth as God's Son, we have additionally, and really even more important than that, what we saw is the prophetic word. Brother Foy Wallace wrote years ago a book. It's a 600 or so pages. And it's a great book on denominational teaching, especially premillennialism. And he called it God's prophetic word, straight from 2 Peter 1, the prophetic word. And the prophecy made more sure is the idea behind it. Okay, P, what misunderstanding did these disciples again have concerning an Old Testament character who Elijah was? And why he must first... They're saying, well, we've heard that Elijah has to first come. Well, if there's this kind of a reawakening, so to speak, and the turning of the hearts of the fathers to the children of the fathers, and so on, if that's got to happen, we don't see everything that's been happening. And here you're going to have to die. I thought Elijah had to come first. You can see their reasoning. You see how there was confusion about it. And so Jesus then gives the explanation that they did to Elijah what they wanted, just like they'll do to me. And then they understood, he's talking about John the Baptist. Yes. Oh, yes, sir.
When the angel spoke to Father John, he said, he shall come in the spirit and power of Elijah.
Yes, yes. The spirit and power, not Elijah incarnate. And that's really, when you go back to John 1, and that religious delegation went to John the Baptist and said, are you Elijah? Actually, John the Baptist said, no, I'm not.
Well, he's not the prophet.
And he's not the prophet. Yeah, I'm not Elijah. That is Elijah incarnate. Elijah did not come back to earth. And that's what they were evidently thinking. And so he said, he denied that. I'm not Elijah incarnate. I'm not the prophet, but I'm the voice of one who speaks in the wilderness, and so on. Okay. Yes, sir. Oh. The Lord cleared that misunderstanding by saying that Elijah had indeed returned, that the Jews did not know him, that they did what they wanted by killing him, and that he would likewise suffer a similar end at their hands. Then they understood the references were to John the Baptist. And that mentioned at least three great truths: his deity, the end of the Jewish covenant in him, and his resurrection to a glorified position, or at least implied in the Transfiguration. All right. Comment, question? Anybody? Cooper, anything? All right. Let's move on. And let's read again from Matthew's account. Matthew 17, 14 through 21. Brother Charlie, if you would read that for us. Matthew 17, 14 through 21. Yes, sir. Matthew 17, 14 through 21.
When they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, Because of the littleness of your faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. But this kind does not go out except by prayers and fasting.
Okay, very good. Let's turn to Mark's account. We have Mark 9. We have a little longer description of what occurred in Mark, the 9th chapter. A little more discussion from the Father in Mark's account. Let's not read all of it. Read with me. This is Mark 9, verses 14 through 29. It's a lengthier reading here. Great, if you'll notice, verse 14, when they came to the disciples, okay, now he's been with what three? Peter, James, and John. Now he comes back and he's evidently with all of them. And so evidently, during the time that Peter, James, and John have been up into the mount, this man who has an epileptic son and demon-possessed, he's mute, he can't, he just had all kinds of problems. The demons throw him in a fire, throw him in the water. And the father has brought the son to the apostles, and what was the problem? They couldn't cast it out. Evidently, this was a hard case, so to speak, and perhaps the violence of the young man somewhat intimidated the apostles. Well, we hadn't seen something like this, so you'll notice let's just spot read a few. What was his problem in verse 17? The young man, that is. The father says, I brought him to your... He was what? Mute. Yeah, couldn't speak. And then drop down in verse 20. They brought him unto him, and when he saw him straightway, this has brought him to Jesus. The spirit did what? Convulsed or tore him grievously. He fell on the ground, wallowed, foaming. That's usual, what do we call that in medical? Seizure, usually due to epilepsy, right. And he asked his father, Jesus, asked his father, how long time is it since it hath come unto him? And he said, from a child. And then we've got another problem in verse 22. He cast into the fire, into the waters to destroy him. And he says, if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Well, that's a little statement that he made, if you canst do it. And Jesus took note of that. And look at what he said, verse 23. This is not in Matthew 17. Jesus said unto him what? If you can. If you can? I take it to be how Jesus, if you can. And he said all things are possible to him who believes. And then look at the answer the father gives. Straightway the father of the child cried out and said, I do believe, Lord. He didn't say, Lord, I believe. But there was evidently a lingering what? A lingering doubt. And maybe the father kind of represented the other apostles. That this is such a terrible case. He foams at the mouth. He falls down and he's torn. He's convulsing. Can't you just imagine that? He's foaming at the mouth. He's crying out and turning. And he just dives over in a fire one day and maybe in the water another. And his father's having to rescue him. And the apostles see that. We've not seen anything like this. And so all of a sudden, not only the father, I've got confidence in you. This is real hard though. And the apostles, we got confidence in the Lord. Man, that's really tough here. So there's that lingering doubt. And so he says, I believe. But then he said, help me in my unbelief. And that's a wonderful, isn't that wonderful? That I do believe, but I want any doubt in my mind to be eradicated. I want it to evaporate. I want to have completely confident in heaven and hell and the Lord's grace the Lord's judgment, the Lord's severity, everything about the Lord I want to be confident in and have absolutely no question about. Well, when Jesus saw a multitude came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit. Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I command thee, come out of him and enter no more. Having cried out and torn him much, he came out, and the boy became as one dead, insomuch that the more part said, he is dead. But Jesus took him, he wasn't dead. Jesus raised him up. He rose when he came to the house. So they separated. That's when the disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we do what you did here? Why couldn't we cast this devil out? And he said, well, it's because of your what? Your lack of faith. If you had faith as small as a grain of mustard seed, you could have said to this mountain, remove hence from yonder place, and it would have removed. I want to show you a couple pictures here. Here is the northernmost area here up around Mount Hermon that Jesus had gone to, close to Dan. What is, you remember Dan, from Dan to Beersheba, Dan in the northern part, is up in this area. This is looking back toward Mount Hermon as going south from Mount Hermon. And here in the Dan National Park is the Dan River, one of the tributaries to the Jordan River, very close. And the reason I'm saying all that is because in this reserve here, a very fertile area, there are tremendous numbers of mustard plants growing. And to get you an idea of how large it is, this is just south of Mount Hermon, close to the Old Testament Dan and New Testament Caesarea Philippi. That's how big a mustard seed is. That's my buddy Al Burns, his hand. And so here's his ring, and it says it's smaller than a wedding ring. It's just very, very small. And so what Jesus does here, he takes two things that are close by. He always used illustrations that made sense. In this case, things that were close by. He said, if you have a faith as a grain of mustard seed, you'll say to this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove. Isn't that amazing? He used things that were just right there by. Here's Mount Hermon, large, 2 miles high. Here are mustard seeds. And what was their problem? Well, the apostles, they had little faith. And he said, if you could just have in the immense power that God has to grant, what they were seeing was just if God could speak and the worlds could come into existence, surely on a scale, a small, in comparison to, if you had just faith to amount to the size of a mustard seed, you could tell this 2 mile high mountain over here, remove from yonder place, and it would remove. So I just thought that I wanted to share those with you. Yes, sir, Landon?
What's so remarkable about this teaching is it's something that they could relate to, that they knew then, but so can we.
Yes, we can too. Yeah.
Thousands of years later.
Yes.
I mean, this shows the masterfulness in Jesus' teaching.
Exactly. And master teacher, exactly right. And so what happens is then he heals this demoniac boy whom the apostles could not heal, and then reprimands them for their little faith. We had several questions. We've run out of time. What we'll have to do, and I hate this, partly my fault, but we'll have to start on our questions on page 96 at the top Wednesday night, and just answer those questions about the demoniac boy. If you read all three accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he was one tough case. And evidently that was the reason that the apostles kind of stumbled over it. And the Father even said, if you can, be compassionate toward us. If you can. It's tough. And Jesus answered in an unlimited way by saying, with God all things are possible.